So we're trying out this new kit. I hope it works better for everyone, particularly the Zoomers. Many thanks to our treasurer, Joe here, who's taking over the control of the piano, who purchased the equipment, and if anything goes wrong, we'll be knocking on his door. The subject of the talk tonight is a little bit out of our normal frame, I have to say. We don't talk a lot about graveyards in this neck of the woods, although I noticed, especially a colleague friend who is a specialist in these areas, also in the audience today. But our speaker tonight, Tim Ryan, was given such an extraordinary positive endorsement by a trustee of the Friends of Elders Way, so we have to have a go and see how it works. And having had the privilege of seeing through the slides already, I think we're in for a fantastic time. And those of you who read the press release that I issued prior to this will have discovered that Tim lives in Penrith. His internationally known company is based in this area, and he seems to have carved out a special niche, and we'll hear more about it today, about having to apply modern technical analysis methods for gathering data on churchyards within the whole of England. He has a massive programme in front of him, and we'll hear tonight how far he's got. He's also acquired some sort of celebrity status, I understand, appearing on national television not long ago. So the subject matter that we're going to hear today actually has national significance. I feel very privileged to be able to present Tim to you today, and I'm sure we're in for a real treat. I also am sure we'll never look at graveyards in the same way after we've heard what he has to say today. So without more ado, can I pass the floor to Tim?
Thank you very much, Tim. Can everybody hear me all right?
So two Tims speaking, right?
It's a terrible Tim. But no, I'm really grateful for the opportunity to join you here this evening. Thank you to Gordon and Joe and to Tim for this, and also for Anne when we did our dress rehearsal a couple of nights ago. Anyway, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the project that we're doing. It's actually called by the Church of England the National Burial Ground Survey of England. I'm sure there's nobody in this room that has never been into a churchyard or a cemetery or a graveyard. I would suggest, if you haven't, please put up your hand. But this project came about a few years ago, quite a few years ago, actually, 7 or 8 years ago, when I'm a chartered surveyor by profession. My background is I've lived overseas for more than 20 years in different countries, worked in the Middle East, in Qatar, in Oman, in Yemen, also in the Caribbean, in Bermuda, in St. Lucia, a little bit in Texas in the United States. Came back to the UK in 2002 finally, and we set up home with my good wife, who's sitting at the back, at our house just outside Pooley Bridge, actually, not quite in Penrith. So we are very, very local to here. And started the business Atlantic Geomatics, sometimes referred to by friends as Atlantic Geriatrics, but that's probably just myself and not the team that works with me. So we formed the company, and then we were doing surveying and mapping. One of the biggest projects we actually got, we were contracted to map the whole of Gibraltar, which was a fascinating opportunity where we visited and mapped the position of every single street, every single door, every single rooftop, everything that you can think of. And it was to provide a comprehensive map to enable the government of Gibraltar to manage health, crime, fire, emergency services, policing, etc. And it's still used now, even though we finished that in 2012. And it was not long after that that we were asked by the Dalston Parish Council to map the churchyard in Dalston, which we duly did. And I don't know if any of you have been there, but the churchyard at Dalston is quite long and narrow. And we've all experienced paper maps in our lives. And of course, the map you want and the things you want is quite often on the edge. And because it was long and narrow, there were two maps that we had to produce to provide a sufficient scale to enable people to see the information. So we delivered the map, the 2 paper maps, to the church, and they came back and they said, we'd like a digital copy of the map. And I said, why do you want a digital copy? What format would you like? And they said, well, we don't really know, but we'd like to keep it up to date. And I'm quite curious, how are you going to do that? We don't know, but if we've got a PDF, maybe we can draw on it. And that got me thinking, and we went away and we did a little bit of playing around with technology and a piece of software called AutoCAD, which is generally used throughout lots of engineering, architecture industries for doing drawings. And we put all of the map of the churchyard onto this AutoCAD, and we added some photographs of the gravestones, and we went back to the parish council and they said, yeah, this is something we'd like. This would be really helpful. So the next step was, let's contact the Diocese of Carlisle. At that time, they were still based in Carlisle on West Walls, not in Penrith as they are now. And it took me quite a while to get through the door. There was a very strong personality there, a lady called Eleanor, who was a lovely lady once I got past her, but she said, no, they're busy, they don't want to talk to you. I persisted and persisted, and eventually I got through the door, and they jumped at the opportunity in the diocese, and they said, what about sending out a questionnaire? So we put together a very simple questionnaire, sent it out to all the churches in Cumbria with very simple questions. Do you have a map? What sort of map do you have? How many records do you have? How many gravestones? We had over 120 replies, which was fantastic. And over 90% of those churches did not have a map. And of those that did, it was probably something that was hand-drawn or sketched. And some of them were absolutely beautiful hand-drawn maps, but they were all different shapes and sizes. And so we thought, this is an opportunity. So we bit the bullet, made the plunge. We contacted Lancaster University, and we took on 2 programmer graduates, and we took on another person from the horrendous green InfoLab building, if you know it, at Lancaster University, and somebody to lead the project. And we started with a blank screen, and we built from nothing what we call the burial ground management system. And this is what we then started doing. And we started to get interest, and we started mapping a few churchyards throughout Cumbria, and then that interest spread. And the Church of England in Westminster heard about it, and we met with the head of Church Buildings Council in Kendal, and they said, we'd like to do this for the whole country. And I said, well, that's pretty good. How many churches are there? They said, well, we don't really know how many we've got. It's somewhere between 15 and 19,000. And I know if you Google Wikipedia, if you Google Church of England, you always get different answers. And to this day, we don't know exactly how many there are, but we think it's around 16,000. The challenge we faced is they said, yes, we'd like you to do this. We'll do everything. And we put together a contract, and we got an agreement signed by what's called the Archbishop's Council of the Church of England. But they said, we're not going to pay for it. And we thought, okay, so how are we going to do this? I said, we're not, much as we love doing it, we're not doing it for love. We would like some income. So we had to fight really, really hard, and we actually managed to get, and I'll show you some pictures in a minute, but we managed to get some finance and funding from an organization called Family Search, and they're one of the largest genealogy companies in the world. And they have a free website that anybody can go on and look at their family history and do their research. And we spoke to Ancestry, the genealogy company. We spoke to Find My Past. We spoke to another one called My Heritage. And we also got an agreement with My Heritage. And they agreed to pay us for every single church that we would do in return for having copies of the data that we would create. So that's how we were going to get the funding. And so the project started, and of course, the natural place to start was here in Cumbria. I think you all know England is full of absolutely stunning, beautiful churchyards. And one of the things that I find about them is that they're always peaceful, they're always quiet, they're lovely places to work, You don't get much, nobody pesters you. Apart from wildlife and flora and fauna, they're really, really wonderful places to spend your time. And I know even children love going along and looking at what's written on the gravestones and things. They're fascinating places. They're attractive to the biodiversity. And of course, churchyards, they haven't been cultivated, nothing has been done to them for centuries. And so the flora and the fauna is a really attractive thing within churches. Lots of rare flowers, lots of rare plants, animals, birds, you name it, they're all in there. But what we also found is that the church actually don't know how big their churchyards are. The Church of England do not have any idea. And none of them are actually registered at the land registry. So we thought there was another benefit in us doing this project for them. And I've mentioned genealogy companies, and I think one thing that's really, really important is we did not set out for this to be a genealogy project. It was about providing a complete record of all of the Church of England's church estate, that is. Gravestones, wonderful, wonderful things. And I've seen, I don't know how many thousands of gravestones, but of course they're at great risk. The best way to preserve the inscription on a gravestone is to lie it down flat, face down. But of course you can't read it if it's face down, but that at least stops the weather causing any problem with what's written on there. But these examples here, you can see there's some where the wind, the rain, the weather causes all sorts of erosion, and eventually, over time, they become illegible. And though they're there as a memory of somebody who's been interred in that place, but we need to find a way to try and at least record where they all are. One of the things that is quite unique as well about what we're doing is all of the genealogy companies that I've already mentioned, none of them actually provide you with a good location of where the graves are. There is a site called Find a Grave, which is affiliated to Ancestry, but it's done by volunteers, and so it can be very, very random. And I know a lot of churches around here, they say that they've got all of the records, but the photographs are taken by volunteers. And I've even seen pictures of gravestones with somebody's handbag hanging on the side of the gravestone, and that's not really something a genealogist wants to see, or somebody who's doing their research. Also within the churches, there are the registers. The vast majority of the Church of England registers are held in county archives or diocesan record offices around the country. In Cumbria, there are 4. There's obviously the main office in Carlisle. There's one in Kendal, one in Barrow, and also one in Whitehaven. And so these records, after a church's records are over 100 years old, they are supposed to put them into the archives for safekeeping. What is really important as well, that those records always belong to the church, regardless. They are the authors of those documents, and so the ownership of those and the copyright is of the original books is actually with the church. But these records are often at great risk. They can be lost. I'll tell you a couple of horrendous stories in a moment, but one of the other reasons behind this project is to digitize them all and provide a way of protecting them and preserving them so that people don't have to handle these records too often, because every time they get handled, they obviously deteriorate. Maps and plans, of course. I love maps. I'm a chartered surveyor by profession. That's what my background is. But any map is out of date well before it's even published. And even digital maps, Google Maps, that we all use probably pretty much every day, they're very difficult to keep up to date. And of course, you've got 2 examples here. The one on the left is actually Highgate Cemetery in London, and they're using Tipex to mark it up. And it's also very difficult to read, and it's subject to mistakes and errors, so very, very difficult to maintain. And the map on the right is actually a church in Halifax in Yorkshire, where obviously it's falling apart. And so it becomes, in some respects, a pretty useless record of where things are. Worst case scenario, some churches have got nothing at all. Absolutely nothing. And this is where I can mention a couple of examples. The worst example I've ever come across is bonfire night. Wet November evening, couldn't get the bonfire going. And somebody said, and I can't tell you where this is, but somebody said, there's some old books in the church, nobody uses them. they'd be great for starting the fire. And that's what they did. They got one of those books out of the church, crumpled it all up, and used it to light the fire. Gone. No copies, no nothing, gone forever. 2015, of course, here in Cumbria, floods. Records were lost in the floods. Appleby is a good example where records were lost. Fire, and even theft. There have been cases of theft. Another horrendous story is that somebody took the safe out of a church, they took it away, opened it up, and there were some old books inside. What did they do? They threw it over the bridge into the river, gone. So these are really horrendous stories, and without those records, the information it's impossible to find where ancestors or people have been buried. And of course, we also hear a lot of stories at the moment about in the lack of burial space. We're running out of space, and they're looking at ways to change the legislation so that graves can be reused. I was actually at Highgate Cemetery in London on Monday this week, and they have new legislation that allows them to repurchase a grave if it hasn't been used for a period of years, so that they can use it again. So there's all sorts of challenges and other reasons beyond the genealogy side as to why we're doing this project. So basically, and this photograph is actually Highgate in London. This is the grave digger, and he is trying to find things, and it's just very, very difficult. Highgate is actually probably the worst example that I've come across. It is totally random. There's 170,000 burials, 55,000 graves, 40-odd thousand gravestones, but they're all totally random. So when they started burying, they put the first grave, number 1. Number 2 was somewhere else, the next one, and they just literally numbered them in sequential order rather than systematically. So it's very, very difficult to find things in there. All of this is confusing. This picture was my grandson. What does granddad do for a living? This is what he does. I'm not quite sure which one is me. I think I'm probably the one in the black, or whether I'm the one in the brown and green stripes. If you can see the colours on our pink screen here, but yeah, that's all very, very confusing, and it's very, very confusing for churches around the country and for local authorities with their cemeteries as well. And of course, the biggest tragedy: what if we lost all of this information? What if it was gone forever, and you can't get it back? As I've already mentioned. So here was born we signed an agreement with the Church of England in actually 2021, and it's called, as I said earlier, the National Burial Ground Survey. The Church of England is divided into 42 dioceses. That includes the Diocese of Europe. So we're actually looking at 41 dioceses around the country. And the objective has always been to work systematically through the country. When I look at the map in the middle, that's when I get frightened. When you look at all those dots, that's where all the churches are. And I think, really, are we going to try and do this? And I still wake up sometimes in the middle of the night and think, oh my goodness, should we be doing this? Will we ever get it done? At the moment, that's a good question, which I'll come back to at the end. But if you look at the map on the right, of course, the Diocese of Carlisle, 335 churches within the diocese. This is where we are today. This is the progress we've got. So what we do is, once we've got a diocese on board, they sign a memorandum of understanding with us that they're happy that the parishes can be mapped within the church. And then we have to contact every single church in that diocese individually and seek their permission to survey this churchyard, to photograph the gravestones, and most importantly, as I've mentioned, is to actually digitize their records. And that is the most important part, because we do have to have their permission. So the areas in orange, if the colors are correct up here, they are the ones where we've actually started the process. So you can see, obviously, the diocese in Carlisle. As it happens, the next one that we have really worked hard in is the Diocese of Cornwall. So we've got the two extremes of the country. So obviously we've worked around here, but down in Cornwall was totally different. Diocese of Exeter, Salisbury, Oxford, Oxford is huge. There's over 800 parishes, 800 churches in the Diocese of Oxford. So they're the ones that we have had communication with the parishes, and the ones in orange that are the ones that have actually currently signed up. Just an idea of numbers. These are some numbers of the work we've done. In Carlisle, we've mapped every single churchyard. In Cornwall, we've mapped, or the Diocese of Truro, that is, we've mapped every single churchyard. The total area we've surveyed is 331 hectares. The number of memorials we have mapped is 184,000 just in those two dioceses. And we've taken 365,000 photographs of those gravestones. We've digitized in the Diocese of Carlisle 234,000 pages of register books. And we've now got just under 2 million records, names of people buried in the churchyards in Cumbria. So these are big, big numbers. And if you multiply the 2 million records by the 41 churches, you're starting to get a feel for the scale of the work that we've got ahead of us. It is colossal, it's incredible, but that's what we're trying to do. Just a couple of examples here. This is actually the smallest register. As you can see, it's the same size as this. It's the smallest register that we've actually digitized. And then we have one of the largest. This one weighed 16 kilograms, this book. And you can see Sam here, bless him, he's one of our team that does all the digitizing. And he had great problems getting this onto the machine that we use for photographing and digitizing these records. But they're fascinating, and it's very difficult to avoid getting drawn in when you see something and it attracts your attention. You're looking at these books, trying to do these thousands and thousands of images, not to stop and think, gosh, that's really interesting. It's a very difficult thing to do. And this is one of the oldest ones that we've done. This one was, I think it was 1564, 1565, something like that. So there's some really old books, and we've even had books they've got calf skin as the binders, and one we found there was a musical manuscript on the inside of the front cover. It's fascinating, all of this. So how do we do it, and what do we actually do? The picture on the left, people think of this as, some people think it's a Ghostbuster. That is a phenomenal piece of technology, and when I see the results from this technology, even now, and we've been using this for a few years, I'm absolutely blown away. You'll have all seen, as you walk around or drive around, surveyors walking with poles, and they'll take a measurement here and they'll measure this table. They might be there for 10 seconds, and they might be taking another measurement here 10 seconds later, and they're going around. Just imagine how long that would take to measure every single gravestone and every single tree in the churchyard. This piece of equipment, we can do a small churchyard, perhaps an acre, in less than 1 hour. And with that equipment, we're taking 300,000 measurements per second. So a typical 1 acre churchyard, we're probably getting in the region of 50 to 60 million points of data. And we're recording the position of every tree, the paths, the signs, the buildings, the gravestones, and we can even record and extract the height of the gravestone as well from the data that we collect. We then have to process that data to produce a map along the lines of the one you can see on the right-hand side. So this technology, it's called a backpack, believe it or not. It's a very expensive backpack. We were very fortunate that Cumbria LEP did give us a grant towards purchasing this equipment when we first bought it. And that was amazing. It's got 5 cameras, which is capturing photographs of the surrounds, not the actual inscription on the gravestone. It's got 2 scanners taking the measurements and a very accurate GPS receiver that you can see on the top. And that is, we're getting the accuracy down to around probably 5 to 10 centimeters in terms of what we're doing. So it's very, very precise information. So that's phase 1. Phase 2, and this is actually really important, is a second team or a second person will go back once the map has been produced, and they will take photographs of all of the gravestones. And they're also actually doing a quality check of the map, because the surveyor with his backpack is walking at normal walking pace up and down, and he's focusing on making sure that he's got all the information. So he might be missing gravestones that are on the ground or perhaps behind a bit of vegetation. So the person taking the photographs is also checking that the map is accurate and of good quality. And where we can and where we've got permission, we also go inside the churchyard and photograph the plaques on the walls as well, or even on the floor. So which sometimes there can be a lot of these. So that's really, really important. Stage 3 is the digitizing that I've already alluded to of the registers and of the books. And this is, we've got this down to a fine art. When we were first doing it, we were quite slow, but now we've got this down, and our team, Sam, that you saw in the photograph earlier, he's doing about 2,000 to 3,000 pages of photographs or images every single day. So we're getting through this quite rapidly. And in the Diocese of Carlisle, we had, I think it was over 5,000 registers, 5,000 books, and that's taken us about 3 to 4 months to complete. The fourth stage, and this is the most labor intensive, every single line of every single register and every single record is manually transcribed into a database. We hear a lot about character recognition software. We've looked at that, we've tried that. It's reasonable, but particularly the old registers and the old books, the handwriting could leave a lot to be desired, or it may be faded, it may not be consistent. So it generally comes down to a manual process. And then those records, so the information in a burial register is matched to what is written on the gravestone. And that enables us to tie everything together so that that we know the location. A frequent question we get asked, and I'm sure somebody will ask the question, is what about unmarked graves? Unfortunately, there's nothing we can do about that if they're not marked. We have done some churchyards where we've used ground penetrating radar to fill in the gaps, and we can identify graves, but the results can be a little bit variable depending on ground conditions, moisture content, age of the body, perhaps under the ground, the level of decomposition, etc. So it can be a little bit hit and miss. And if we can find graves or coffins or something like that, then we still don't know who's there. But that is where the church afterwards has the opportunity to add that information at any time, because the system that we have built, the burial ground mapping system, which I hope to give you a quick example at the end, enables a church to keep it up to date so they can add new records. So in effect, it's a living record of the deceased and of the buried. So it's a dynamic solution. It's designed not to be a one-off, one-stop shop. So the result being what we call our burial ground management system, or BGMS. So this is the end result, and you can see an example here on the right-hand side. All of the gravestones have been mapped in the churchyard, and when I show you the example, you'll be able to click on a gravestone and see what information is behind it. One thing that's really important is that what we have built, and it still requires more development, it's an ongoing system, and perhaps one of the biggest challenges that I hadn't anticipated was that if Microsoft or Google or Apple or somebody changes their software, then that affects the things that we have built and the platform we have built. So it's constantly having to keep it up to date. So it's a very, very ongoing commitment, but it was designed to be as easy as possible to use. And a good example I've got is we did a church in Wales a few years ago, and there were 4 ladies who said that we'll put the data into the system. All 4 of them were over 80 years old. They got together once a week of an evening, took turns and where they were, and between them they entered all of the data. And I'm sure they had a great time. They probably had a few bottles or glasses of wine while they were doing it, but they had a great time. It was a really, really great to see the community getting involved in the project. It was such an exciting thing, and they absolutely loved it. And of course, when you get the 4 of them together, they're saying, what do you think this says? And the accuracy of the information they were putting in was really good. So it's great to know that that was done. People talk a lot, and we hear a lot nowadays about data security. Nothing that I know of, no security or computer system or software or database is 100% secure. We all know that the Pentagon's been hacked, other places have been hacked. To this day, we haven't, that I know of, but we conduct what's called a penetration test by a third party on an annual basis. And they're an independent organization, and they try to hack into our system, and they provide us with a report as to where there might be potential opportunities for anybody wanting to extract that data. And then we also take a lot of pride in customer service. We're a very small team, but it's really important to have a good relationship with the churches. And I've found and met so many wonderful people, one or two who have been quite difficult, I have to be honest. But the vast majority of people that we meet in churches and dioceses around the country are just wonderful, and they're there because they want this system to work. So summary in terms of what it actually does, it's preserving the records, protecting those records. We hope for eternity. I don't know what technology is going to be like in 10 years' time or 20 years' time, but I'm sure it will be ongoing. It's not that long ago that we were using floppy disks. I was talking to one of my grandchildren the other day, and they said, "Dad, Granddad, what's a floppy disk? How does that work?" And I was trying to explain that when you loaded Windows, it took 36 floppy disks that you had to put into your computer one at a time. Then there was no room for anything else on your computer because they didn't have the capacity. But it's there to preserve this data and enable it to keep dynamic. And it's also for consistency. So across the country, as I've mentioned, there were so many wonderful maps that perhaps people have done, volunteers have done at their church, but everyone is different. And also it tends to be done just for that individual, for a small group of people. And so the idea is to get this out there and make it publicly available, as well as become something that empowering the PCC, the parish councils, to keep their maps and their records up to date. I don't know if anybody's heard of an organisation called Caring for God's Acre. They're based in Shropshire, and we've been working very closely with them. And they, as part of the agreement that we have with them, they will be providing people who will come along after us, and they will provide training courses, seminars, webinars to help people on how to keep the system up to date, how to use it, what they can do from it, as well as to record the biodiversity. That's their particular interest, is to record the flora and the fauna. So we don't record what the gravestone is made out of, for example. So there's a group doing this in Birmingham at the moment where we've done a churchyard, and they're adding what material, what's the condition like of the gravestone. A PCC, as I've said, they can keep it up to date. If an inscription gets changed on the gravestone, they can take another photograph and add it to the system. It's very, very easy to do. I use an iPad, and I can go into a churchyard or a cemetery, and with the iPad, I simply select the gravestone that I'm trying to photograph, take the photograph, and it's all done. When we first started out, we had this wonderful utopian solution that we would go out with Nikon cameras, take pictures, record which gravestone it was, go back, process it, upload it, link it. It was taking ages. So when we had the two graduates from Lancaster, we built into the system so that they don't have to do all of that. You literally take the photograph and you know it's safe, it's stored, and it's up in the cloud. Which also reminds me of a very funny story near Kirby Lonsdale. And I was doing a presentation like this to a PCC, and there was a lovely lady sitting in the front, and she fell asleep. And she was sitting like this, and her head was going, and she was fast asleep. And at the end, the chair of the meeting stood up and said, "Anybody got any questions?" She stood up, "I think it's a damn good idea, let's get on with it." I don't know whether she heard any of it or what, but she was great. So the PCC, they can, another good example of a use for it as well. We had one church, they have a contractor who cuts the grass, and the contractor was charging them a fee for the area. We did the church, it was a large one. We found out that the area was a lot smaller than the contractor had said. So it actually meant they were able to reduce the cost of cutting the grass. So it was a cost saving benefit. Or if they're resurfacing a path or something like this, there's measurement tools, similar to the ones that we have in Google Maps. So you can measure from the lich gate up to the church door, for example, to see how long it is. So there's lots of things behind it, as well as quickly finding results. So typically, if somebody calls up the local priest or wants to find information, they say, well, we'll get back to you in 2 weeks. And under the law, within the parochial law, a church can actually charge a fee for that research, but it's such a time-consuming, difficult thing for them to do, and they're all very, very busy. They tend not to do it, but with this, you can find it in seconds. And that's a massive, massive opportunity, and it frees up a lot of time for the vicars to go and do other things as well, go around and have cups of tea and things. Inputting new baptism, marriage records. We're very, very conscious. I mentioned security, but one thing that is really, really important is GDPR and safeguarding. The Church of England's had a lot of publicity and bad press recently about safeguarding and about other things, as we all know. But we invested heavily in doing what we call a data protection impact assessment. We will not share or do anything with any data of a baptism records that is less than 100 years old. So anything for the last 100 years is kept totally secure and is only given to the parish because that person could still be living. A marriage record, it's 70 years. So all of that information is kept secure. And none of the genealogy companies should, because I know they don't, publish that information either. And we would not release it or share it with any of them. I've mentioned new memorials, adding a new memorial, adding a new grave, adding a new photograph. There's so many things they can do. Another thing, when we get the permission to go inside, we can also produce drawings. We don't do this as part of the national project. And the whole idea with this is we can do floor plans or elevations of the building because our surveyor with his backpack can walk around this room in probably 30 seconds and walk out of the door, and we've got the whole information from inside here, the lights, the light fittings, the switches, the ceiling height, the floor, everything. So we can produce floor plans and elevations of the building, as well as general plans of the churchyard itself. So they may want to have a plan that they use for a faculty application, for example. Ultimately, one of the things we would like to do is to facilitate faculty applications on the system that we have so that they can all do it online. Different levels of access. So it is ultimately meant to be on public access. There are a few churchyards online that you can have a look at. And if you look at our website, you'll be able to link to those. But of course, anything that is public, there's no addresses, there's no personal details, it's purely burial information, records of the deceased. So there's very limited search functionality, whereas each parish, as I've mentioned several times, has full access to do everything and anything they want. They can see all of their information. Okay. Community engagement. I love this part, and I love this opportunity. And this is actually probably one of the most rewarding parts. These photos, I went to this is in near Huddersfield. These children were amazing. They had such a wonderful day in the churchyard, and they loved it. And they were going around with their iPads, taking pictures of the wrong gravestones and things. But they were fascinated. For the first time, a lot of them had never been in a churchyard before, and they were really intrigued by this. There's another example in Bishop Auckland. We went there, and one of my colleagues and I, we were asked to go to the secondary school, and we were given a 35-minute lesson to talk about the project to the drama students and the art students of the school. It was great. 35 minutes went by in no time, lots of really good questions. The teachers shot out and they came back and said, we've cancelled their next maths lesson. We'd like you to do another 35 minutes. And those drama students and art students put together a little play, which they performed in the church about doing the project. Again, another benefit. And you'll see there's a video I'm going to show you in a minute about something else that we did as well. So I think also the schools, the Church of England schools, provide a wonderful asset that we can use. Children now are phones, technology, they use it, they're better than any of us, I would like to think. Sorry, forgive me if you're not. I know Jamie at the back's probably more up to speed with the technology, but they are great with it. And we actually, as you'll see in this video in a minute, we spent a day at Nelson Tomlinson School in Wigton. And this was very much in the early days of the project. And the reason we went there was, one, to share what we were doing with the students, but also to get them to have a look at what we were building and use them as sort of guinea pigs to test what we were doing. And of course, they said, why can't you do this? What about that? That doesn't make sense. And that was a really useful feedback for us. But they could be a great asset for keeping it up to date, because some churches say, we don't have the resource, we've only got volunteers and we can't do this. It's actually not very difficult. It only takes 2 or 3 minutes to add a new record to the system or take a picture. So I think children in schools could be a wonderful asset for keeping things up to date. So hopefully the sound will work, and we'll just play this little video clip.
It's a long way from a normal day at school, as you or I might remember it. As part of Citizenship Day, these pupils are helping to map Wigton Graveyard. Some are doing it the old-fashioned way with pen, paper and church records, while others work with professional surveyors using cutting-edge technology being pioneered in Cumbria. A bit of history, a little geography, a dash of life skills and a little work experience, all rolled into one.
So it's a project to map the digital records of burials, so you could use it for genealogy research in the future, but also so the records don't get lost, because as they're paper records, it's easy to lose them. It's working with the local community up here and the people involved with the crematorium, and it could be asked on a GCSE paper in the GCSE geography, so a real combination.
For the students, it's also the chance to get out of the classroom and see how the lessons they learn in school can be practically applied in the real world.
It's different than the normal classroom. It's better, like more outdoors and fun.
Well, it's good to get outside and you learn a lot of history here.
We'll physically get to do activity instead of just learning art.
Citizenship lessons in school are not something many people are very knowledgeable about, but the professional surveyors working with the school say that days like this are a great idea for inspiring the next generation.
There was some press just recently about what they should be teaching kids in school, time management, other things, but what they're seeing today is what it's actually like, what day-to-day activities you would do if you were in a job. It is really useful life skills that they're seeing in action today of what it is like in a day of the life of a surveyor, really.
It wasn't taken that long ago. That's not me. That's actually my son, Oliver, who's working also in the business and will hopefully be able to take it on as I become less able to do so. But that was actually when we first started the project, so that was actually filmed a few years ago, but I think it's really useful to see how you can interact with the schools. That was when we were using a drone, and we invested in quite an advanced piece of technology. What we did find, it was wonderful. The imagery we got was fantastic. The accuracy of the data we got was wonderful, but of course you can't see under the trees. You couldn't see behind things. It was very limited. And that's where this backpack technology was far more advanced and far better. It's wonderful having the aerial photography of the churchyard. And in the ones that we did, people say it's lovely, and you could see whether there were daffodils on the grave, what they were. You could see flora and flowers from the photographs. They were that high quality. But when you actually put that into the system, nobody was actually looking at them. They weren't interested in the aerial photographs. They're more interested in the data that is sitting behind. Just a few pictures of some of the team. You've seen Sam, but this is some of our team that we have working on the project. Not all of them. They're a wonderful team. I think they've all got smiling faces there. They're lovely. I really enjoy working with them. So what do we ask in advance of doing this? We try to keep the amount of effort that the church puts in to having their churchyard mapped to the absolute minimum. Sometimes they say we're all too busy. We don't have time to get the church ready. There's nothing to do other than say, give us permission, and if you can, cut the grass. That is actually the one on the sheep. That's in Yorkshire, where they're using sheep to cut the grass. They let them in on a permanent basis. The only problem, of course, is the deposits that the sheep leave behind, but it is a great way to maintain the churchyard. I think so. Give us the consent, and on the required day, if they want us to do inside, is to open the door. Other than that, there's nothing to do. In Cornwall, in particular, they have a thing going throughout the whole diocese called the living graveyards, and it's all about the flora and the fauna, which I've mentioned lots and lots of times. And they don't do a lot of cutting of the grass, and they let the wildflowers grow. So we tried the best we could to work around that schedule, which made it a little bit difficult. But typically with the backpack, one of our survey team, he can do maybe 3 or 4 churchyards in a single day, so we can actually move quite quickly. But then there's a lot of processing of all of these millions and millions of points to produce the 2D map. So I'm just going to finish off. I've no idea how long this has taken, but just finish off with another video clip. And this was actually filmed near Keswick. This was from ITV, and it sort of summarizes really a little bit about the project.
Etched onto every stone is the story of someone's ancestor, if only their descendants can find it in a maze of memorials. Well, now, surveyors are aiming to walk every row of every one of the Church of England's 19,000 graveyards, mapping millions of headstones.
What is got on board that backpack is 5 cameras, which are taking a photograph every half second, 2 laser scanners, and from that information, we can then create a 2-dimensional map of every single gravestone and feature within the churchyard.
Starting here in Cumbria, the project will also digitise church records to create a vast national database of who's buried where. A pilot involving 2 churches is already online. When the system's up and running, you'll be able to bring up a map of any churchyard, click on any grave and find out who's buried there, along with some information about them and even an image of where they're buried. And crucially, if you know the name of the person you're looking for, you'll be able to search the entire database for them. Technologically, it's a big step up from the current system.
If you're looking for Mrs. Smith, we would go to the card index.
This church has been meticulously well organised, but still relies on index cards together with paper maps of the plots, too time-consuming for many vicars who say a new database will help them too.
People who are looking to research family trees, family history, local history, don't have to just be channeled through the church. Vicars have got a lot of other things to do. They don't want to be dealing with lots of requests for family history. This opens it up to absolutely everybody.
But for some, documenting gravestones is nothing new. Family historians like William Bundred have been doing it for years. He says making it more accessible is good, but there are limits to what you can find out from an armchair with an app.
It depends on what you want to get out of it. I mean, whether you want to be a sort of a number crunching genealogist, or you want to look at the lives and the places that your ancestors lived in, which I think is part of the fun.
William thinks the surveyor's goal of mapping every churchyard within 7 years may be a little ambitious, but if they can, it will soon be far easier to find our way back to those who were here before us. Ben Chapman, News at 10 in the Lake District.
It's quite interesting, that video clip, and you may have heard it mentioned a couple of times, 7 years. That was always our objective, that was always our goal. Unfortunately, we have hit a number of problems along the way. And I think, as Tim mentioned, there was a piece on the One Show last week, which was actually filmed a year ago. It was lovely to meet Kate Botley, those of you who know who she is. She does a lot on Radio 2 on Sunday mornings. It was wonderful and it was a great opportunity. But we have hit a number of challenges. And those challenges have caused a number of delays. As I mentioned, we've pretty much finished all of Carlisle. We have to get all of the data into the Diocese of Carlisle. We've mapped all the churchyards in Cornwall. We've photographed all the gravestones. But where we're facing challenges is actually getting access to the archives and the records. Even though we have permission from the churches, that has caused a number of challenges and hit us with quite a long delay, which has been extremely challenging for us. And then also, it's not something that most people are aware of, but we had a wonderful working relationship with Family Search. Family Search are actually the genealogy arm of the Church of Jesus Christ and the Latter-day Saints, or i.e. the Mormons. And then, so last year at the Synod in the Church of England, when they met in York in July, one or two people stood up and objected to us doing the project and having a partnership and an arrangement with the Mormons. They also objected to us commercializing the data, but they wouldn't pay for us to do the work. When Ancestry, as an example, have over 3 million subscribers paying between £1 and £200 a year to access Church of England's records on their website. And if that's not commercializing, then I don't know what is. So that's a challenge we've also faced, as well as the issue around safeguarding. We've addressed all of these issues. We have cancelled our arrangement with Family Search, the Mormons. And they were going to digitize the records for free for us. And I've got to say, Family Search have been an incredible organization to work with. They do so much work around the world. When the invasion of Ukraine started, within a month, they sent people into the archives in Ukraine and were digitizing the records so that they weren't lost during the crisis there. They've done work in the Philippines where records have been lost because of floods and hurricanes. And they've been very supportive of us. They've helped with training, they've helped with equipment. They're an incredibly good, positive organization. As regards safeguarding, I mentioned already, we've dealt with all of that because we don't share data of anybody that's living. So we're very strict about that. And then the other one was the commercialization. Well, that one, I still struggle to understand why that's a problem. But I've had regular meetings in the last couple of months with the Church of England. I was there in London meeting with the Synod a couple of weeks ago. And we're doing everything we can now to resolve this and get this project back on track. We won't finish it within the original 7-year goal, but I know that we could do it in 7 years or even less, because we've also learned so much about how to do it. So that's sort of the status. And I know it sounds perhaps a little bit on the negative side, but that's reality. That's what life is like. I think the Church of England, the biggest challenge with them is they don't go very quickly. They take a long time to make decisions. And every diocese is different. As I say, there's wonderful people. I spent 2 hours in the living room a couple of weeks ago with one of the archdeacons down in the Diocese of Blackburn. Wonderful, lovely cups of tea, lovely bread, lovely cakes, wonderful. Really nice people, but it is very, very difficult to work with. Well, I think one of the other things I mentioned, Highgate Cemetery. We've done Highgate Cemetery in London. That's been an amazing project. They're a fantastic client. They're really wonderful to work with. I was there on Monday, and it's quite nice and exciting to say that we've mapped Karl Marx's grave. We've mapped George Michael's grave. When we first did that, we weren't allowed to tell anybody where it was because they had so many people turning up. We've done Charles Dickens' parents' grave. We've done Harold Wilson on the Scilly Isles. It's wonderful to have done all of these famous people, and it really gets exciting. And it's quite interesting in Highgate. My surname is Viney. I found 13 Vineys in Highgate Cemetery. And do you know what it costs to actually be buried now? Do you know how much a grave plot costs in Highgate Cemetery? If you look on their website, you can see it's between 30 and 50,000 pounds for one grave plot. And for your ashes plot this big, it's not very big at all, just to put your relatives' ashes in there. So if I may, if I can, and if the technology will allow me, I would like just to quickly show you an example of what the finished map looks like. So I've logged into our system previously, so it's very secure, and I'm not going to share the password. But I'm actually going to, you'll notice I've got Appleby St. Lawrence as a local example. And I can open up the map of the churchyard. It's not, we haven't built this for the mobile phone yet, for the small screen, because the mapping can be very complicated. But what we have is on the map, we've got layers of information, so we can switch off where all the memorials are. If grave plots are mapped, which they're not in Appleby, but that's something that we do in Highgate and local authorities. The vegetation, we can turn that information off and simplify the map, lighting, signposts and so on. But if I put on the memorials, you can see all the memorials. And then if I want to find, for example, I can search. So I want to find everybody buried between 1850 and 1860. How long would that take to do now? You've got to go to the archives, you've got to go and get the book out, you've got to write it all down. So we click on the magnifying glass here. And so over that 10-year period, we've got an immediate answer. 308 people were buried over those 10 years. And if we know the location, and some of them we don't, it will pop up on the screen as we scroll down. And if we can also pull up the information here, we can find all the burial details, we can look at the burial record of them, and we can find that person there. Appleby, we haven't got all of the data links, so I'm not showing the best example because, as I say, we're still digitizing the records, but I'm going to show you another one where you can really get a good example. And this is actually in Lancashire, in a place called Adlington, near Chorley in Lancashire. But if we look at this one here, and if we turn off the vegetation to make it more simple, what I think is another benefit of the system is we can look at the use of the cemetery over time. So if I wanted to find everybody again buried between 1860 and 1870, that would take, in a cemetery of this size, which is about 2 hectares, that will take some time. But here, oops, I've not clicked the search button. Come on. Please don't let me down. No results. I've put something wrong. Let's start again. Why did it work for me? I think I'm not sure if my internet is working very well. That's a bit embarrassing. But if I go in here and I click on any one of these graves, I can see who's buried in there. I can see there are 4 people. I can look at the details. I can see the photograph of the stone. I can see a photograph in context of the stone. And I can also, if there is a register, I can look at it. So it's very, very easy for them to find this information. So it's very, very quick. If we have a look at Highgate Cemetery. As I mentioned earlier, Highgate Cemetery has 170,000 people in there. If I want to find all the Vineys, there we go, we've got 11 Vineys in there. And Winifred, let's have a look at Winifred. There we go, that's where Winifred is. Imagine how long would that take if you didn't have this? There you go, and they've got 170 paper maps. They've got, I think, 60 registers to go through to find that information. You're finding it instantly and quickly, and I can even look at Winifred's gravestone, and there we go. And so you can see there's a tremendous amount of benefit on using history for time. Children love it. Another school example is going to the school, and we went on Remembrance Day, November the 11th, and the children were able to look at their churchyard and see who was buried in the First World War, who was buried in the Second World War, and start to look at the statistics. And it was they loved it. They were really intrigued, and they all wanted to get out into the graveyard and have a look at it. So that's a very quick snapshot. On our website, there is a link to some of the sites, which are the public ones that you can have a look at. That, I don't know if you're sharing the links, but if you look at agintl.org, as you can see at the bottom that's our website, then you should be able to find some examples there. But that's my piece for the evening. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you found it interesting, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Completely mind-boggling. I mean, quite amazing. I mean, I can't even begin to imagine how you analyze all this data. Anyway, that's for another lecture, but I'm just extraordinary. When you touch on Highgate, I know it's something you reasonably well, we can go there quite a lot. So I can imagine the mammoth task you have with mapping there, because it's a sort of nature paradise with vines all over the tombstone. So all sorts of opportunities for difficulty in really understanding what's behind it.
Highgate is quite an environmental challenge. Tim's mentioned the ivy. This is a huge problem with the gravestone, because those of us who have ivy growing up the side of our houses or whatever, you know, the roots get in there and they start to cause problems. And that is what happens with the gravestones. So the environmentalists saying, leave it, it looks absolutely wonderful. Whereas the historians and the architects and so on are saying, take it off because it's destroying the gravestones. And it's a really difficult thing for them to manage. And it is a shame, because it does remove some of the inscriptions, but that's part and parcel of their challenge. It's amazing what you find out, what goes on, and how difficult it is to run a graveyard or a cemetery. It is not something that is easy to do. All sorts of stories I've been told. I'm sure there are some undertakers, or there are some cemetery managers who could write wonderfully exciting novels, or perhaps there could be a TV series about them. But I know there's one where they told me that the hearse was going up a hill and the coffin slid out of the back onto the road, and of course all the mourners are following that coffin's on the road. All sorts of these stories, and then the stories of people, well-known people. We mapped the plaques in Grasmere I can't remember the name of the church, where they've got a path with all the plaques and the names of various people that you can buy, and one of them was Rolf Harris, which we had to remove in there. So you know, there's all these things that they have to deal with. It's very sensitive and very difficult at times.
Questions from the floor?
You just do Church of England ones, or I mean, Highgate isn't specifically CB, is it?
No,
The Acropolis company. So
it's not actually. We've done one in Athens. We've done a few on Cyprus, working with the Greek Orthodox Church. The bishop in Nicosia is lovely. He's a lovely man. I've met him several times. And he loves sharing his communion wine, which is also very enjoyable. He's a really nice gentleman. But no, so we've done a few in Cyprus. I mean, my dream would be we do as many as we possibly can.
yeah, I was thinking closer to home, things like non-conformists.
We've been working with some local authorities. We've done several what they call natural burial grounds, which are becoming more and more popular now. There's one at Skipton. There's one in Burton in Kendal as well. There's a well-known one there, Burton in Kendal. We've done that, and we do that. We update that for them every year. So yeah, it's not specifically Church of England, though. We hope that the Church of England becomes the sort of the cash cow that helps us make this the way we want it to be.
Thank you.
Any other questions from here?
What about Scotland and Wales?
Yeah, we've done some pilot projects in Wales. Church of Scotland, we haven't pushed hard at the moment. They're much more organised with their records. They tend to be more centrally based. And it's similar in Wales as well, actually. The churchyards are managed centrally, as opposed to England, where they're all managed independently. So it's a lot easier to do them in there. So maybe we probably started off in the wrong place by doing the Church of England, but I mean we are open to any. But right now the battle that we're trying to do is to get this Church of England working, and the sooner we can get the Diocese of Carlisle up there and published, I think that's when the real benefit will be seen.
The legal issue I keep on coming across is who owns the plot, who owns the gravestone, who's responsible for maintenance, who's responsible for management. Because there's a lot of stakeholders, isn't it? There's the church, there's the council, there's the family, there's the relatives, there's all sorts of stakeholders, and often nobody wants to take responsibility for it, they all leave it to each other. Because nobody wants the responsibility for maintenance and management. So do you not find you come across that sort of dilemma as to where the legal rights are?
We find it more in public cemeteries as opposed to church cemeteries. And that's a big problem because the records going back tend to be quite poorly maintained in some of the local authorities. And of course, the record of who owns that, because you have to get a permit to install a gravestone, and that will belong to somebody. They tended to be in perpetuity, but now they're looking at having them on sort of short-term leases so that that problem doesn't exist. So in Highgate, for example, I was talking to them on Monday, and they're looking at 40-year leases for the grave, so that after 40 years they could actually potentially reuse it. But we're not massively involved in that side of it. It's not something that we really have. I'm not saying we don't have the desire. It's certainly interesting to find out. But what I find interesting, I mentioned Athens. We did a cemetery in a place called Kifisia. A couple of well-known people. Anybody uses is it the Farge yogurt? Is it Farge? I think the yogurt that you can buy in Sainsbury's.
Yeah.
Did his grave. We did the person that started off the Athens Airlines, Athena, or whatever they're called, the Greek airline. But in there, a grave plot can be up to €100,000 for one grave plot if you can afford it, and that will be in perpetuity for the family until there's nobody left. If you can't afford it, you're buried in a common grave for 3 years, and then they dig up the remains, put them in a plot to the side of the cemetery, and then after another couple of years, when everything was decomposed, they put them in boxes and then reuse the grave. So it's quite interesting seeing how different people were.
But that's how it used to work in this country, you know, ossuaries and bone houses. Where the bones always ended, well, just where the skull and the femurs ended up, and everything else was thrown out.
So I know some are now looking at vertical burial for reduced space as well.
Are there any questions on
Not as of yet.
that? Can I ask a question? I think you said that all this information was in the public domain for free. Is that the case? Is the database, is it your database or the Church of England's database? And
it's ours. It's our database, when we've done a complete diocese. So I mentioned that we've just finished digitizing all the records for the Diocese of Carlisle. Once we've got all that information transcribed and linked, then we will publish the whole diocese publicly available.
So I'm just wondering in our own context here, since we have the Friends Out of the Way has a mandate with all the councils we started as a working group with the councils around Alsals, and I wonder whether it'd be of interest to the people who are looking at our own website, we have a heritage website, whether we could provide, like public information, the sort of documents that, or summary of the documents that apply to the churches within our bailiwick, if you like. How easy that would be, because a lot of people who come here to look for their, I bumped into one not long ago, the person who was looking for their gravestone was a family member. Maybe it's that type of information which you can put on our website.
It could be linked, they can definitely be linked. It's quite interesting actually, because you know, the family historian, William Bunter, that you saw in the video clip, and he talked about, you know, part of the enjoyment is going there. What we've found on the few that are public is it's actually attracting interest. There was an article written about what we're doing in a genealogy magazine in Australia. And last year, Oliver, who you saw on there, my son and I, we went over to Salt Lake City, and they have a massive genealogy event there called Roots Tech, which is actually happening today and tomorrow, again, annually. And they had over 2 million people watch that, or either attend in person or actually attend it online. So it's a phenomenal amount of interest in there as well.
imagine what you want to leave as a legacy. I mean, what an amazing project you see, we've got to start involved in.
I can probably say on my gravestone, I told them I didn't start this project.
I don't mind getting with anyone else in the code. Is this technology you're using unique? Is everyone else, is it patented? Do you have?
No, the backpack is actually made by a company called Leica Geosystems, so probably maybe you know them more for cameras and photography. They're actually a German company, but they're owned by an American company, and that piece of equipment is made in Italy. It's a six-figure sum to purchase one of those, and to the best of my knowledge, there are 4 of them in the UK. One of them is used by a local authority in Lancashire they walk up and down the coastline to measure the erosion of the sand, so they can do comparative models. And I think National Grid use one, they walk along the power lines because it can measure the overhead electricity lines, and they can see if the sag has changed of the overhead lines, of course, so it's a very safe way to do that sort of thing. So it's not massive, and it as I say, I get blown away by the data, but there are other types coming along as the technology goes on so quickly.
Any more questions?
I walk through our churchyards, churchyard most days. The older part, mostly headstones are about green. So would you then go to church records and mapping that's in there, that's written on paper, to try and work out what's on that stone? Or is it just lost?
The good thing is it's lost, but if somebody has got that information, it can be added afterwards. So obviously for the success of our project, we can only map what's there. If it's illegible, there's nothing we can do about it. We'll still photograph it. Yeah. But then if somebody comes along, and it's happened in a couple already that we've done, where they say, oh, I've got a photograph. The WI, for example, did lots of photography of gravestones in years gone by, and they can add it to it at a later date. So and I think that's a good thing. It wouldn't be cost effective for us to spend all that time putting it all together. It just wouldn't work.
In the late 19th and early 20th century, there was a very big craze in writing down gravestone inscriptions. So I rely on them now, because 90% of the gravestones that I look at are illegible now, but they were legible 150 years ago.
Yeah,
and they're recorded in parish books that were written in sort of late Victorian period.
I remember one lady coming up, she had an A4 notebook and she had it tucked under her arm. She came up to me and said, look, and she opened it up and she had post-it pads in her book. And every single one of those post-it pads represented a gravestone. She spent 5 years recording the inscriptions in all those gravestones. And I think that's a good example of it was amazing what she had done and the time she'd taken. But if she lost that, or she passed on and the children said, oh, we don't get that, and throw it away, all of that is lost forever. But it could be added.
Yeah. I'll ask Gordon, our chair, to say thanks in a moment, but for that, can I just ask you, we have a tradition here that anyone who speaks, we raise money from donations. There's a little basket over there if anyone wants to make a donation today or anyone online. We keep 50% of those donations for phone sales on the way, but the rest we give to the speaker to allocate to their own charity of choice. I wonder who you would like to.
Two charities spring to mind for me. One is Sam's, but I'll pick Sunbeams, a local charity, who I know, they do a huge amount of good work with children. So yeah,
Sunbeams, very, very good.
Yes.
Very well respected.
I think anything with the support for children is invaluable.
And then I'll just say something about two events we have coming up. One is so our next event is going to be a site visit to Goldwood Beck on the 15th of March by Rebecca Powell, who is the National Trust for Women's Project Manager. We set ourselves a maximum number of people we can take in the field. There are 25 people maximum. We have 25 people, so for those people maybe online or here who are coming, I'll send out some more information on that, in the next few days. And the next talk will take place on the 3rd of April, in Glenreading Village Hall. And it's a bit of a, again, different from our normal run-of-the-mill talk, rather like, yours is an exception to it. So it's going to be given by Squadron Leader Nigel Warmby, who is the person who manages and does all the training flights of aircraft, as you see them bugging down this valley and other valleys, and he's going to talk about low flying in the lakes. And one of the reasons we've asked it is that on our sort of Heritage Knowledge Bank, the most visited element in that bank is an article that he wrote on low military flying. And so it obviously creates a lot of interest. We have about the system account, the number of hits, and these low flights are popular or of interest, I'm not sure. Anyway, he's going to come along on the 3rd of April and give us a talk about what he's doing, training Ukrainian pilots and other. So maybe I can just ask Gordon to say a few words.
Well, thank you.
Chair, as you know.
Thank you very much, Tim. I'll try to avoid the because he's certainly not using dead reckoning, are you? I mean, the amount of data, the amount of information that you have to process, and it has to be accurate. It's just an incredible undertaking. Just to even think that you can do it in 7 years, never mind 17 or 70, really is quite something. I mean, I think we've all learned a lot of things, not just about the technology that's employed, but just what has gone on over the centuries in terms of keeping these records, because it's all secret, not secret, but it's there if you thought to even look for it, or hopefully it's there, and as we found out, some of it isn't. So I think it's a fantastic thing that you're doing. Who knows what use ourselves or future generations will put this information to in terms of the research that they want to do. They'll be looking at plagues and even COVID and things like that, because it's all going to be recorded for future generations. And I think that's just a fantastic thing that you're doing. So on behalf of everyone here tonight and the people who've tuned in on the Zoom as well, I'd just like to say thank you very much indeed, and we wish you well with the rest of your work, and good luck, and thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Zoomers. We'll put the links out on subsequent emails. So and also the recording. I have to say the sound and the video is much improved from